City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Harold Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is the president of the Shubert Organization, Mr. Bernard Jacobs. Bernie, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad you're with us. You have been with the Shubert Organization for quite a while now.
Well,
how many years, really?
30 plus.
30 plus. But you and your colleague, Jerry Schoenfeld, took over running the Shubert Organization at a certain point, and I think it was faced with a lot of problems at that time,
When we took over the organization, it was in great distress.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the problems at that point?
Well, some part of the problems were we didn't have any money. We didn't have any working capital.
You mean the Shubert Organization itself had no working capital?
The Shubert Organization had no working capital. We owned the theaters, but theatrical real estate was not very interesting to banks in those days as credit for any kind of loan. And I remember I called Morgan Guarantee, who was our banker because they had been the executors of the estate, and talked to them about establishing a credit line. They laughed at me. Of course, today I'm sure we're considered one of the best depositors.
I'm sure you are. Well, now, what did you set about doing then to turn the organization around?
Well, I think Jerry and I came to the conclusion that, one, the organization had not been an active producer, and the only way you're going to get product is to become active in the field of production.
This is in order to fill the theaters up.
Well, we had theaters. In those days, out of our 17 and a half theaters, I guess that 12 or 13 were dark.
Really? Out of that large a number were empty at that time?
The numbers were about that. But of course, you understand we have some theaters that are dark all the time.
No, I understand that, but the percentages have changed.
The percentages have changed. Now, at least in this day and age, all of our musical theaters are lit or...
well, with big hits. I mean, you've had Cats running for a long time, Les Miserables, and Phantom of the Opera, Miss Saigon.
Miss Saigon's just coming.
You're right, exactly.
We're doing very well in our musical theaters, and even Aspects of Love, which is not a big hit, is a very good show to have in your theater.
Right, right. But let's go back to that time because I really would like to trace just briefly what you and Jerry have done to build the organization to the point where it is today. Well,
the first show we invested in, as my recollection, was that Stuart Ostrow was short of money, and we gave him, I think, $100,000 for Pippin, which was a lot of money to us in those days because we were not in a position of being willing to take risks. And if you remember, our then Attorney General, Louis Lefkowitz, was beginning to look at the Shubert Foundation and wonder whether or not it should not be using his assets in a better way rather than keeping it invested in theaters, which were not producing any income, and therefore the foundation was not in a position to perform the charitable functions which he thought the foundation should perform.
So you were sort of fighting on two fronts. You didn't have much money, and you had the Attorney General who was looking over your shoulder.
Who was driving us crazy in those days.
But you put $100,000 into Pippin, which was the musical that Bob Fosse directed.
That's right. And Stuart Ostrow produced.
And it turned out to be
a very successful one. Yes.
And then from then on you began to
we become more and more involved in production, which we had to do because if we didn't produce shows, our theaters would be dark. We discovered that very early.
But now when did you start, because there are several other things I want to touch on that you've done. One was renovating the theaters. Weren't they in fairly bad shape? Had they been neglected just physically?
Well, nobody had done anything to the theaters for really a generation, and the theaters were in terrible condition. And we determined you had to make the theaters look better, be more attractive, otherwise people weren't going to go there. You had to improve the neighborhood. The neighborhood was in terrible shape. If you remember this, shortly before we took over, they had moved the curtain from 8:30 to 8 o'clock, and the reason for that was they wanted to get people out of the area early enough because it was so crime infested.
As a matter of fact, there was a brief time when it was even 7:30, as I recall.
Yes, And David Merrick broke that.
And then they
Remember?
finally settled on 8
Wednesday
o'clock as a compromise.
Exactly.
But that was one of the main reasons to
Well, the
move
main
it?
reason was because of the fact that the neighborhood was so bad and became so bad as the evening went on that they wanted to make it appear to be safer.
But so did you start on a sort of careful schedule of renovating the theaters through the years?
Well, we knew we had to renovate the
Yes.
theaters, and we put aside substantial money to do that. But of course, in order to do that, we had to make money. And
was there any point that sort of at which you turned the corner in terms of adding to your capital base, or was it just a gradual process?
I guess really the big turning point was Chorus Line. This was a turning point for a lot of people in the theater.
Absolutely.
But that was the first really big hit that we had.
And were you substantial then producers of that monetarily?
No, we were not substantial producers in that. We were substantially involved in getting it together because Michael Bennett had been working down the New York Shakespeare Festival putting it together, but he and Joe were having trouble about money, and we were instrumental in solving whatever problems they had so that Chorus Line could continue and then ultimately move to Broadway. Originally, when there was a big problem that Joe didn't have enough money to move it.
We're speaking of Joe Papp now.
Yes,
at
Joe
the
Papp.
New York Shakespeare Festival.
And he wanted because of his lack of funds, and since he had funds at the Beaumont, because he was running the Beaumont in those days, he wanted to move it to the Beaumont, and Michael wouldn't have any of that. And we really effectively loaned him the money to move the show to Broadway.
Bernie, while we're
It was not a bad investment.
No, I think that's an understatement. Bernie, while we're talking about Chorus Line, I want to detour for just a moment because you were one of the people probably closest to Michael Bennett in his professional and I guess personal life as well. You really were his mentor, I think many people feel. Tell me a little bit about his talent and your working with him.
Michael always, for one reason or another, he decided very early in our relationship that I was his father figure, which had its good points and its bad points because sons don't always like fathers, and sometimes he would become very rebellious. But Michael was a genius, and
when did you? Because he had choreographed Seesaw and Follies and some other things, and then began to direct and choreograph on his own.
Well, really, we got to know him best, I think, when he did the show for Merrick, Tip of My Tongue, in which Donna did that.
Donna McKechnie.
Donna McKechnie did that big dance number. It was the Neil Simon play. What's the name of it again? I forget.
The musical.
The musical.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about, and I can't think of it right now.
Well, it was a fun tip of my tongue, and then I just missed it.
Yes.
It'll come back.
They're playing our song.
No, not they're playing our no. Playing our song was at the Imperial.
Right. Oh,
no, this was.
You think of them in terms of where they were
yes,
playing.
Yes, I know. No, this was
anyway,
this was the Shubert. He had done A Joyful Noise first, which was his first show, and then this was his second show, which Neil Simon had written the book for, and Michael choreographed, did not direct it. And he did that herky-lurky number in it that Donna McKechnie danced, Donna having been very close to Michael.
Yes,
one of his
from
young
when they were
years.
very young.
Yes, they both came from Buffalo, I think.
Right. And so that's when you first got to know
That's
him.
when I first got to know Michael. Got to know Michael a lot better when, particularly during the days of Follies.
Right.
And
which he choreographed and really co-directed with Hal Prince.
He co-directed, and he and Hal really kind of broke up their relationship over that show. They'd been pretty close before that, and I mean, he did several shows with Hal, and I think that was the last show they ever did together. And from that point on, Michael wanted to branch out on his own.
What in your judgment was his genius? What was he so good? What made him so unique in terms of shows like A Chorus Line and Dreamgirls and the others that he...
He had a remarkable theatrical eye. I mean, he could see and envision things that that very few, if any, other directors in musical theater have been ever able to do, in my opinion. He had an overall theatrical concept. I mean, a lot of our choreographers who became directors really never rose above being choreographers, even though they had the title of director. But Michael really had a wonderful concept for the theater, everything he did.
Do you mean the way in which one scene follows another and the way the look of the whole thing?
The look of everything on the stage. The location and what everybody did on the stage was important to Michael. Michael was really, in that sense, really an artist.
Was he a perfectionist about these things?
He was as much of a perfectionist as we'll ever have, or we will have, I think. He's sorely missed.
Oh, there's no question. Well, we've lost a whole group of choreographers. Him, Bob Fosse, Gower Champion. We've lost, and I don't see all the replacements coming along.
There are none.
What's going to happen with that, Bernie?
Well, we'll have to wait until we get another. There'll be some more. They'll come. Right now, we're getting along with musicals without choreography. That's all.
Which you all have a great many right now.
And they're not bad. I mean, nobody can say the Phantom is bad. Now, Miss Saigon has a little more choreography because, you know, Michael Bennett's associate, Bob Avian, did the choreography there. But of course, he doesn't have the kind of choreography in it that he would have in a show in which he had a stronger position. I mean, remember, he was only the choreographer, and he could only do what they let him do, I guess.
I'm going to move back for just a moment in this history of the Shubert Organization, since you and Jerry have been there, and talk a little bit, ask you a little bit about some of the business things you did, and particularly like computerization and tickets and all of that. How did you first get in? Has that revolutionized the business as far as you're concerned?
Well, in the old days, if you had an advance sale for a show, you had just so many tickets, you had so many racks and so many tickets you could handle.
That you had to have the physical ticket.
You had to have the physical ticket. So in other words, you would put the physical ticket in racks, and no box office could handle more than about 8 or 10 weeks. And
they used the term racking, didn't they?
Racking, yes. They would take the tickets and break them up, and according to their price and according to their category, they would put them in different racks, and it would be color-coded in order to meet that. In addition to that, you not only had the limitation of the box office, but you would have some more tickets which you could store upstairs in some office or someplace. So you might be able to be selling tickets 18, 20 weeks out, which meant that if somebody wanted the ticket for a big hit and they wanted a good seat in the orchestra, in 18 or 20 weeks, you didn't have any tickets. So the person would write in, you would tell them, well, they should write back, and in 18 or 20 weeks, when they wrote back, the tickets were gone again, because as quick as they were put on sale for a big hit, they would go. Now, today, without any trouble at all, we can put 1 year's tickets on sale for any show.
And they probably for Phantom of the Opera and some of Les Miserables. Do you have is it a year's? It could be a year's advance easily.
Well, Phantom of the Opera presently, I haven't looked at it recently, but we have an advance for around $23 million in New York, which would have been unheard of in the old days. I'm not talking about dollars, because obviously ticket prices are much higher than they were.
But even
in terms of number of tickets, I mean, there really is not a good seat available for Phantom of the Opera for
months and
7, 8, 9 months out.
Well, now, how did this computerization? Did it take you? Because you now things have switched to phone reservations, and this computer, can you tell what seats are available for every one of your theaters for many months?
We can tell what seats available for any theater at any date, at any time, any place within our chain. That is. I can sit in my office and I know precisely what's available every place. Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, New York.
And so you have people who have on banks of telephones taking telephone orders too, don't you?
We set up a telephone center on West 42nd Street, in which we have over 130 positions, and we usually have about 60 people working there taking telephone orders.
For all of your shows?
For all of our shows, all over the country.
Does this help you stay on top of the kind of business you are doing, not only advance sales, but week by week?
Well, you can tell precisely what's happening. I mean, since we have such good computerized control, we can almost predict precisely what any performance is going to do.
And you can know day by day, really,
exactly.
how well you're doing.
Well, for shows like Phantom, or Les Miserables, or Miss Saigon, you don't have to know, because you know they're all sold out.
But one that was in between, you
One's
could
in
keep
between,
very
you can
close.
watch them much more closely. You can precisely tell whether or not advertising is rewarding or not, whether or not a particular ad works, whether it doesn't work. I mean, you have a very good grip on your business, which you never had before.
And then the tickets are printed out of a little machine, so they don't have to stay in
No,
racks the way they used to, because they all come out, they're all printed out on the spot then, aren't they?
Exactly, but you got to keep control of the ticket stock, because otherwise, you know, whenever you're dealing with cash, there are all kinds of people who take advantage of you. So you got to keep very good inventory control of your ticket stock.
Why do you mention that? Because that's an interesting question. Because there used to be a feeling that some money was slipping through the cracks in terms of producers and theater owners and so forth. That is, that there was some money that I think they used to use the term ice, which was the money that found its way into somebody else's pocket. With these controls, has that pretty well been eliminated?
No, you'll never eliminate it, because as long as we sell a ticket for $60 and there are people out there who are willing to pay $200 for the ticket, somebody's going to get that difference.
But not in the box office.
Not in the box. Well, we think we have the box office under pretty good control. But, you know, if the box office people don't get it, there's a group of people whom we generally call diggers, and their job is to buy tickets in the box office, then in turn to sell them to brokers in Jersey, where it's not illegal to sell tickets at an exorbitant price over the box office price, and they sell it there. And if you look in the Post and even the Sunday Times, you will see their ads there for tickets for Phantom of the Opera and for other shows like that. And if you'll call those Jersey numbers, you will see they will ask you $300–400 a seat for our $60 tickets.
Good gracious alive.
And since I checked that pretty closely, I've done that on quite a few occasions.
You call those numbers.
Call those numbers.
Bernie, speaking of ticket prices, and everybody wants to know, I think, who is not involved in the business, why it costs so much to produce a musical or a straight play, for that matter. A musical costs can cost $7 or $8 million to produce.
Well, I think that
where does all that money go?
Miss Saigon, if my recollection serves me correct, and I'm not really quite sure now whether it was $10 or $11 million, but I think Cameron has that budget for $10 million.
Where does all that money go? I think people would love to know how that sort of generally breaks down, maybe.
Well, it goes into sets.
What would the sets cost? Maybe $2 million, $1.5 million, $2 million?
A set for Miss Saigon probably is around $2 million. I assume that helicopter alone is about $1 million.
Isn't that, I mean, that's phenomenal.
That's all. Lighting, $500–700,000. Costumes, another $700–900,000.
Costumes for a show like Phantom of the Opera.
Rehearsal time. Remember that with minimums, equity minimums, which in 1961 it was when they went out on strike, when they came back to work they got $135. They're now getting $900 under their new contract.
The actors' equity. Yeah.
Now, again, very few actors work for minimum. Minimum is just
where you start.
That's where that's the standard, and everybody. The test of any actor is how much above minimum does he or she get. So there aren't too many working at minimum. In addition to that, you understand under the chorus contract, if they do anything which is at all out of chorus, they do anything out of chorus, out of a group in unison, they get paid extra for everything they do. So the $900 minimum is only a starting point even for the chorus people.
So all of these elements then add up to that total cost we're talking about.
You know, well, here, let's put it this way. The Jerome Robbins Broadway has 60-some-odd people in the cast.
Yes.
The cast cost must be about $90,000 a week. When My Fair Lady was done in 1956, was it?
Yes.
1956, it was produced for $300,000. And its capacity was $60,000 a week, which is more than what the cast cost today for
Jerome Robbins
Broadway. And Jerome Robbins Broadway is not, it has a very large cast, but it's not exceptional in terms of cost.
On other counts.
And yes, in connection with the totality of the cost.
Let me ask you, there have been so many different plans and ideas in the last few years, in recent years, to try to, particularly for straight plays, to try to bring the cost down and to get the union's cooperation. And a plan was announced back in June of 1990.
Well, the plan was just announced
Yes,
today.
recently. And to try to bring costs down. Do you think a plan like that has a chance of working or not?
Well, the problem really is that the plays that that will want to use that kind of production.
This is a plan, as I understand it, where all the unions have
All
agreed.
the unions agree to take less money in condition of the fact that theater ticket prices will also be reduced and everything will come down, so the pub will have greater access to theater. The problem with all of those things is if I have a play that I think is going to be a big hit, I don't want anybody to impose any limitation on me as to what I can charge. I want to charge whatever the fair market is. So the fellow who's going to use this kind of procedure, by and large, is the fellow who's least likely to have the big hit. So will you have any big hits out of this? I hope so, but I really...
Maybe it would provide a place, because it seems to me there is a kind of gap in here. Maybe it could provide the place for the play that now might go off-Broadway, has in the past gone off-Broadway, but was really big enough to perhaps be in one of those, be in a Broadway-sized house, but not with an elaborate
That's
production.
what they say, and that's what they hope. And we'll see what happens.
And you sound skeptical about it.
Well, I'm not the most optimistic person about the plan. I never was, and I think that everybody has known that. I mean, I really believe that...
Well, what do you think is the answer then in terms of the let's say the straight play? Because we've been talking about
what is the answer? What is the answer to the subway fare, which in my lifetime was a nickel, and now is what, $1.15?
$1.15 now.
All right.
Maybe $1.25 by the time this program's
That's
on
right.
the air.
Well, look, I can remember when I went to Columbia Law School, with a quarter in my pocket, I would put a nickel in the subway machine. I would buy a pack of cigarettes for 12 cents, which was 17. I would buy 3 newspapers for 6, which was 23, and then I have 2 cents left for 2 sticks of gum in the gum machines in the subway. Now, what would that cost you today?
Well, obviously.
That's
But
now theater tickets haven't gone up in proportion any more than any of those other things. I mean, the Times was 2 cents, and there was a time, if I recall correctly, when the Times raised its price, had the temerity to raise its price from 2 cents to 3 cents, and there was such public resistance to it that they had to go back to 2 cents.
2 cents. Well, but aside from ticket prices and whether that is resistance or to prices or ticket prices is a problem, I think you probably would agree that everyone would like to see more plays on Broadway along with the musicals. I mean, just more, as you say, product, more plays coming to Broadway. What is the answer to that? More being done in the regional theaters that could move, or what?
Well, the regional theaters, I think, have become the farm outlets for plays. You know.
Do you welcome that? Do you think that's a good step?
Well, I welcome it in the sense that, but the plays will be no better than the people running those regional theaters. And if they don't have taste, you're not going to have good plays. Now, sometimes a Broadway producer will find a play which he doesn't have enough confidence in to produce directly on Broadway, and he may become involved in some co-production arrangement with one of these regional theaters, and the play may be produced and then be successful and go to Broadway.
Occasionally, you have a situation which you're one of the producers of, and have been, and it's in one of your theaters, which is The Grapes of Wrath, which has a large cast and originated in Chicago, and then went on when it came to Broadway to win a Tony. Is that an exception?
Yes, but that play, you know, we did that play as a labor of love. Now, if we get our money back from that play, I'll be very grateful and quite surprised. I don't expect to get our money back.
You don't?
No, but I do believe it's the kind of play that the Shubert Organization should do.
Have you done plays? I mean, for example, did you make any money on Sunday in the Park with George?
No, we lost money on Sunday in the Park, but again, that was a play that we felt should have been done, and we did it in the Booth Theater, where even if it was a blooming success, and they couldn't have made any money.
I was going to say, it was in one of your smallest theaters.
It was an 800-seat theater, but we did it there because we knew it could never fill a larger theater. We knew the audience was limited, but we knew the play was a very precious play and a very fine play, and that it should have been seen by as many people as possible.
What are the things, Bernie, that you personally have gotten the most pleasure out of, the most satisfaction out of, that you all have been involved with? Obviously, working with Michael Bennett has been a source.
Well, Chorus Line was a source of great gratification, because we We felt we were there from the beginning. We were certainly instrumental in moving it to Broadway. As a matter of fact, we loaned Joe Papp all of the money to move it to Broadway. And Jerry and I had a very close relationship with Michael Bennett, and I think that there was a great feeling of exultation when it was successful. I think the same thing was true with Michael's other show, Dreamgirls, which we had the same feeling with. On the other hand, we had a great feeling of disappointment when Ballroom was a failure. And you know, Ballroom was a failure. Still, some of Michael's best work was in that show. And you know, Richard Eder, who was the critic on the Times at the time, hated the show. But if you talk to Frank Rich will tell you he thinks it's one of the greatest musicals of all time. So, you know, sometimes it's just the luck of the draw, because the critic on the Times is so important to a show which needs an audience, as distinguished from a show which has an audience. I mean, Rich will say that that he can't have much impact. Even if he knocks a show like Phantom of the Opera, he's not going to be able to stop and keep the audience away. But he's very important to a show that needs help.
Absolutely.
The Times is very important. And sometimes, of course, he doesn't think he has that responsibility. We think he should have it.
Bernie, on that note, I wish we had time to pursue the whole question of critics, but we don't.
Okay.
Our time is up. But thank you so much for being here. This has been Spotlight, and my guest has been Bernard Jacobs, president of the Shubert Organization. Thank you for being with us.